tell you, I looked the guy up. Because in the old days, when you call people and threaten on the telephone, it was, no word against mine. He sent all these texts. He said, I run this town.
Test through Public Works mic, test through Public Works mic.
Was it civil? The trial was civil?
Civil. The jury was not amused.
That was fast. I figured you were doing it the rest of the week, so.
They did not feel like coming back tomorrow.
We've never met,
But it was,
Oh, okay.
it was not a tough decision, because all they had to decide was if there was a battery and how many.
Yeah.
I work in the manager's office.
Hanging in there. See your workforce.
County manager's office. Yeah, I'm over, admin services.
Great, how about yourself?
So, fleet, facilities, communications.
Bad break. Count down. Doritos?
I was going for the Doritos, but something else caught my eye.
It's good to see you.
Good seeing you, man.
Hey, Mike, how are you? Good.
Facebook that. 1 2 1 2. Public Works, Mike?
No, there's,
Yeah, that came up. Yeah, it doesn't usually come up on my phone. Hey Kelly, good, how are you? How do you get on the internet these days?
Yeah, I know. No,
Like, I'm not gonna hear it.
I know, well, yeah.
Don't worry.
All right, I'll come to
Hello, how are you? Okay, I thought so. I was but to work out was fine.
Oh, yeah.
That one's out. I feel reversed at all. Awesome. This totally explains why I've never been fired. Phone it next to the Wi-Fi, but
Well, maybe.
yeah. That one is more than my phone.
Time is 5:35, call this meeting to order. How are you all today?
Good.
All right, welcome back from Thanksgiving. Everybody had a very decent holiday. Looking lovely, well fed, smiles all around. Okay, that guy's way too smart. We had an excellent holiday, huh? Good. Fantastic. What I would like to do, has anyone heard from the pro tem? There we are. We'll hold for a couple of minutes. If you look at your agenda, it is this sheet right here. Hello, how are you all? Welcome back, welcome back. let's see, what we're going to do is go down this agenda. We've called ourselves to order just now. Thank you all so very much for volunteering your time, being away from your families to come and do this important work. What I want to do is make sure that we hit each of these agenda items that we have today, and the county clerk is he present? Okay. Mr. Rathbun, have you been properly sworn? I have. You have, fantastic, okay. That's one thing that we don't have to do. I thought we had to consider that as well. Okay, there's a consideration of the minutes. This first on our agenda from the last meeting. Let's go ahead and get into that particular portion. Take a look at the minutes. Discuss any changes that you might want to make to it, and then take a vote on adopting those minutes from the last meeting. Then we're going to hear from the public comment page that is at the BOCC website, as we discussed last meeting. And then we're going to go into our new business, where we'll talk about our rules that will govern us, and move down to down selecting of maps. Today's target is to, what we want to achieve is walk out of here with 5 maps, no more than 5. We have 11 on hand, and we need to get down because this is a fast-moving train. Then we have some time set aside that we've invited the cab chairs because they have their thumb on the pulse of their particular communities and would love to have their input as far as with the redistricting maps and what that looks like. And then we can get to our adjournment. Okay, that said, did everyone receive the email with the minutes? Did everyone have an opportunity to review the email with the minutes documents attached? At this time, are there any issues with the minutes as presented?
Mr. Chair, I did have a couple of clarifications that I wanted to had added for the minutes.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that I was listed as a member in attendance from that initial meeting, which I do not reflect from those minutes. And also in an email I had sent as well, I had sent my updated, kind of my welcoming information, just to make sure that it's all applicable and available for all those who wanted to see that. And then I also wanted to take this opportunity to make some clarifications on my comments, because I do believe that this is why we're all here in terms of citizen engagement. And so I just want to make sure for clarification purposes of my comments, some of them was in summation concerning the cab chairs and things of that nature. From the last meeting, I just want it to be known that I think that all voices should be represented and brought forth here, and those voices, as many that we can have in this conversation, is important. But I also wanted to not be in a position to say whether the cab should or should not be here, because I didn't want to make sure that I was not stepping on the toes of the commissioners. Maybe they had already spoken with their chairs and decided to go another direction. So with that being said, I wanted to make sure that that was noted and clarified. And my last comment that was also made, it was something to the extent that the commissioners have made their picks and additional members will create conflict. Again, what I meant by that was that the county commissioners had made their selections, and if they wanted to do anything different or deviate, then I felt like that was a conversation that we should have with them in that capacity. But certainly, when I made that last comment about potential conflicts, I just wanted to make sure that it would be an opportunity for all the chairs to be here, because certainly I believe that invitation was extended in the greatest of appreciation and gratitude that all voices could be heard at this table. And I think that me being a former chair at that level, had the other chairs been able to be here, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to be here, I would have maybe, felt some type of way about that. So I just wanted to make that clarification strongly noted that I love you chairs. I love all you guys. And I hope you all had a beautiful Thanksgiving. So my comments was not targeted to be exclusionary in any type of way. I just wanted to make sure that whatever we did was in alignment with the county commissioners and their wishes, and that it was a process to where everybody felt like they would be involved in the process. Thank you.
Fantastic. And let's see, is there a motion to, yes, ma'am, Ms. Stanton.
Mr. Penn, would you note in the minutes that I was also in attendance because my name did not get reflected on there?
Fantastic.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Ms. Cole? Tracking both of those. Are there any other recommended changes from the body? Okay. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes as amended? So moved. Second? Proper second, Mr. Howerton. And now, would like to take a vote on it. All in agreement? Raise your finger for an aye. Any opposed? Nays? Seeing none opposed, ayes have it. Minutes are adopted as amended. And I was remiss, and I do apologize to the pro tem. I would love to turn this mic over to her for any comments that she has here coming back into this meeting. Do forgive me.
Thank you, Chair Penn. No, not at this time, but I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Well, all due deference. Let's see. Now that we have the consideration of the minutes, and those are now into the body with the amendments as spoken on by two of our members, we appreciate that, and definitely appreciate the consideration and the thought that you put behind those remarks. Let's talk about the public agenda. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Cole to see if we can get that going.
Good evening, committee. Tanya Cole, Assistant County Manager. So before you have the public comments that we printed off this afternoon, I think approximately around 4 p.m. We have 6 comments from the public for your review. And next meeting, we will take the comments that we have from 4 o'clock this afternoon till up until that date of the next meeting, which will be December 8th, and have those comments provided for you as well.
Okay, does anyone have any issue or comments regarding the online public hearing comments and review? Okay, that said, seeing no issues, Madam.
Yes, Chair Penn, I don't have any issues. I do have a question as to what, as a committee, we are going to be doing with these duly noted comments from the public. Do we just read them? Do we look for commonalities? I'm just as direction.
I think that, and anyone can lend your thoughts to this as well. I think what we want to do is make sure that the public in general has an inject point to make their voices heard, so that if they choose to, this committee can take into consideration any of their heartfelt comments as well. As we consider the maps to either select or down select those maps, this can be something that would allow us to color and flavor our discussion. I don't think that any of the online comments are particularly binding. I think it's the work of this committee to actually make these decisions, but I want to make sure that we have as many voices as possible, because I'm not sure, but I don't think everyone here is steeped in each of the districts and knows what are the concerns of each of the communities or the residents therein. So we want to give that opportunity for them to have that inject point, so that we can actually be responsive to it as well, as much as possible, without it becoming something that's hard and fast and binding of what our discussions are, but it can definitely flavor and influence our discussions. Madam Yingling.
I just had a question for staff. I noticed that
there's a U next to a majority of these comments. Does that mean that it was unknown what district that they were in?
That I think is a correct assumption.
Is there any way for staff to look up those folks, even if we don't make it public where they're from, in case they hid that for some reason, but just so we're aware of what area of town these folks are from, in case they don't live in a district that they're commenting on, or they actually are from there, just so we're kind of aware of maybe folks' opinions, support one map because they actually live in a different part of town or something of that nature.
Don't live in the county at all.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure. What we can do is we can add a field in there that asks for their address and see if we can make that mandatory population so that we can then figure out what district they live in. So we will add that from this point going forward.
That'd be helpful. And then if we could just get a note on the 4 that are listed here that are unknown, just for our own information.
Okay.
Not to share that with anybody in case they're trying to protect their identity, but just so we know what area of town they're from.
Okay.
I do have some additional comments in looking over, cursory look at the input from the public, and that is communities of interest. That's something that I mentioned, spoke to originally at our initial meeting. I think I asked Mr. Joseph, what the importance of community of interest and what's kind of what I guess I call it the overarching decision maker for the redistricting that we're going to lend our recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. And it sounded as though what I got back was the numbers that you're looking at ensuring the, equivalency of population. So I'd like for us to just for a moment discuss once again the importance of these other factors that present and could potentially be consideration for how it is that we do redistrict. And what I'm seeing here is not only communities of interest, but more specifically looking at not splitting districts, therefore diluting what we would call a critical mass of votership that would be potentially in these districts. And more specifically, do not restructure the racial balance for that exists in black districts, as well as ensuring that minority populations are not splintered. And I thought I saw another one that spoke, So please do not make it harder for minority populations to have their voices heard. So they give, their input as to which of the districts, and then of course, most recently, Commissioner Maggie Ballard that spoke to that, what I would call compact cohesiveness of a community, which I believe is also one of the considering factors. So, I'd like to request, Mr. Chair, to hear from some in the committee if this is important for us to discuss. Yes.
I think constitutionally we do need to discuss it. It is something that we have to take into consideration when determining our maps, whether it is a common story, such as a certain neighborhood, whether it is quantitative in statistics, in race, religion, common purpose, common story, common theme, such as Delano. These are all definitions of community of interest. When it comes to racial disparities, we need to be looking at whether or not these groups of people have access to their voice being heard. We don't want it to be splintered into 4 different, we don't want these groups to be splintered into 4 different districts, which one map does, that will take away the voice of those people. We don't want to split neighborhoods in half because then you're going to have competing interests within those just single solitary neighborhoods. I think taking into consideration giving groups of people, like based on race, ideology, religion, that sort of thing, if it's going to be split into two groups, they need to be split, or two districts, it needs to be split in a way that their voices will carry enough in two districts so that we're maximizing their voices. If we are going to be dividing communities, we want to maximize their voices rather than dilute their voices. I think this is a must that we have to consider. And I know at the last meeting we focused a lot on compactness, population, and those are all very important aspects too. But community interest is something that also goes to natural boundaries, which is a consideration that we have to look at. And so in that vein, it might be a good idea for the committee to try to determine what some guiding principles are in regards to communities of interest. What that looks like in regards to our maps. We have a couple pretty clear...
If I may interrupt you for 1 second, Madam Schodorf, going down the agenda, there's some housekeeping items that we need to take care of before we get into that discussion, okay? Definitely have plenty of comment about the thread of thought that you have right now, but we do need to set some guardrails and guide rails for this particular committee's business.
Then I'll wrap up my answer in just one sentence. Constitutionally, we must consider communities of interest.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Were there any other comments about the public comments, 6 or so, that was presented to you? Any issues with those? Seeing none? Thank you so very much for that, Ms. Cole. How often does this receive an update?
Anyone can go in anytime and make their comments. I plan to give an update at the next meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
With the updated comments.
Okay. Going down our agenda, we have new business, the rules for the redistricting committee. Mr. Fessinger, Michael Fessinger for the county, the assistant counselor, county counselor. I'll turn it to you to go over the draft rules that we may be able to adopt those as well, please.
Thank you, sir. Mike Fessinger, Assistant County Counselor. I'm going to be talking through these proposed rules that I compiled along with feedback from Chair Penn and Chair Pro Tem McRae Miller. These rules are based in large part upon Robert's rules, which is one method out there for organizing a board committee like this. These rules, I think, put up a lot of guardrails to assist this committee in moving through its business. Please feel free to make suggestions. If you feel that there's not enough structure or too much structure, that's something that can be taken up by this committee prior to approving these rules. So, and I also have a couple corrections that I need to make as I take you through this. So, during an agenda item, this committee will be considering what it wishes to do. And before any consideration or debate can begin, there needs to be a motion that's made and put onto the floor. So typically items will not start with just an unguided discussion, but instead a member must achieve or receive recognition from the chair and then make a motion. And that's what number 1 here on page 1 contemplates. Then a second to that motion must be required, must be received. After a reasonable period delay, if there's no second to a motion, then that motion will die and that ruling will be made by the chair. If the motion is seconded, then Chair Penn will restate the motion so that everybody understands what is being proposed. At that point, then debate will begin. The motion maker shall have the first opportunity to advocate for their motion, to debate. And then after that, typically in the order that you ask to be heard, the chair will recognize you and you can add to the debate. I think it's pretty clear to me and perhaps to some of you that there's a lot of work to be done in a short period of time by this committee. So this current iteration of the rules says that, 10 minutes of open debate. At that point, subject to the chairs, the chair shall have the option to limit further speaking periods to 2 minutes each, so we can kind of get through things. Debate must be confined to the merits of the motion. Robert's Rules provides, and I'm on 1F right now, Robert's Rules, I think, provides some good guardrails for debate that I would recommend that this committee follow. Stay on topic, listen to the other side, focus on issues, not personalities, avoid questioning motives, be polite and be civil. After debate, and also during debate, committee members may also move to amend the motion, insert words, replace words, delete words, and the procedure for that is laid out below. In any event, after debate and/or amendment, the chair shall then put the motion to a vote, and you'll each be called on by name, one by one, to vote aye or no. And typically, this board will move with a majority vote. So out of 15 members, we need 8 votes to take an action. After the vote occurs, the chair shall tabulate and announce the result of that vote. Either the ayes have it or the noes will have it. Item 2 here is the procedure for amending a motion. If you wish to do that, you can obtain recognition from the chair and then do that. As you can see, I've tried to make this an easy reference document as well. So, you'll see that on item 2 here, you'll see a second is required to amend a motion. You can debate the amendment of the motion. That would start, I think that would start that 10-minute clock over again. You can amend the amendment to a motion. So if we allow ourselves, we can really start getting twisted up over these things. My recommendation, again, would try to be streamlined about this stuff. And of course, a majority vote would be required. If you wish to withdraw your motion, you can obtain recognition from the chair and then request that your motion be withdrawn. No debate on that, no need for a majority vote. That's just your call, and the chair will say, yes, yeah, you can withdraw your motion if through debate you begin to feel like you wish you had not made that motion. Moving on to page 2, and here's where a correction is that I need to make. If we're looking at number 4 here, you do have the option to move to end debate and trigger a vote on the motion that is being debated. So if you wish to do that, obtain recognition, quote, Chairman, I move the previous question, or something to that effect. A second is required. There's no debate on something like this because we all know what you're asking. Cannot amend this either. Now, here I've noted that a majority vote is required to end debate and trigger a vote on the underlying motion. That's actually not what Robert's Rules calls for, and that's my error in drafting this. It actually takes, my recommendation is that it be a 2/3 vote of this committee to end debate on a motion and then trigger the vote on that motion. And what that does is that halts an 8-person majority from ending debate, and then also voting down something. So again, it ensures that the debate isn't unreasonably stymied. So that is so my recommendation is that change be made. You can also table a motion without a vote. That would be number 5 here. If you want to postpone the question indefinitely or just simply table it, again, a second would be required to do that. No debate, no amendment on this. It's just a binary action, and a majority vote would be required to table something. Now, you can resurrect a motion that's been tabled. You can move again for that. But given, if a majority of people are voting to table the motion, you might suspect that your motion would not have enough votes to pass. So begin to see how these rules sort of interact with each other. If you want to take a recess, that's something that you can ask for. There's no debate or vote for this. Would simply be Chair Penn's call, and you can amend if you think a 5-minute break would be more appropriate than a 10-minute break, something like that. Moving to number 7 here, adjournment of this meeting shall be done at the prescribed time by Chair Penn, which would be, I assume, at the end of the agenda. We get into sort of some other catch-all practical things here. If you want to just complain about a practical issue you can't hear, someone's not using a microphone, the room's too hot, there's a lot of noise in the hallway or something, you can go ahead and interrupt the current speaker. You don't need to obtain initial recognition for something like that. State your complaint, and the merits of that complaint will just be resolved by Chair Penn. Same deal with an objection to procedure, or if you want to object to a perceived personal affront. Again, you can interrupt the current speaker, then you shall, obtain recognition from Chairman Penn. You can state point of order, or something similar. If I'm called upon to help interpret these as we go along, I'm not going to insist that you speak everything perfectly, you know what I'm saying, Again, no seconds required for something like this. It's not debatable, and again, it's not really put to a majority vote. This would just be something that Chairman Penn would decide upon. Same deal with a request for clarifications on committee rules. I'm on number 10 here on page 3. There are some checks and balances in these rules. Number 11 reflects that. If Chairman Penn has made a determination within his purview that you disagree with, you can appeal that to a vote by the board. You can interrupt the current speaker if you wish to do this and then obtain recognition from Chairman Penn. You do need a second if you wish to do this. This can be debatable, but it can't be amendable. There is nothing to amend. You're just objecting to something that you perceive was done incorrectly by our chairman. 2/3 vote would be required to overrule the chairman under this rubric. And finally, number 12 is just a little bit of housekeeping here. This was something that was requested by the chairman, and this was discussed a little bit at the end of our last meeting, but these rules do provide for a requirement that you're physically present in this room to vote. My suggestion is that we flesh this out a little bit as well. We talked about this concept of, well, if you can't make a meeting, you've got to have somebody else in that chair to fulfill this duty. If you wish to resign from the board, you have to do so through a written resignation, I think delivered to Chairman Penn. I think the reason this requirement's important is because we can't have two folks in the same chair, in the same spot on this 15-person committee. So if you can't make a meeting and you want to resign, you've got to resign in writing. Your replacement needs to be selected through the appropriate channels and sworn in before that new person can participate and vote on this committee. So, if these rules are approved as amended, I'll provide that fleshing out as I just described. So those are, again, this is my attempt at a simple, easy reference document to create some rules for this committee as it goes forward. Anything here can be discussed or changed before this committee passes it. If you feel that these are a little too intense, we can talk about that too, and I'd be happy to assist the committee however I can. Thank you.
And as we go through this, I'm going to lean on Madam Pro Tem to annotate both who is next in the hopper to call upon whenever you want to request, so we know exactly who we're going to go into next, and to record all of our votes for the by name as well, and then we run that tally as well. I want to make sure that everything's recorded. That said, Mr. Rathbun, I think I saw your hand. Please.
General information. Do you recall what areas this was different than Robert's rules and why you changed it?
There's another significant difference from Robert's rules that I have discussed with Mr. Penn and Ms. McCray Miller. This would be in number 11 here. Robert's rules provides for a majority vote to overrule a chairman's determination within the purview of the chairman. Number 11 calls for a 2/3 vote. I believe that change was requested just to keep things streamlined as this committee moves at a rapid clip through its business. But that is something that could be changed, and that is a difference from Robert's rules as written. Otherwise, I think I took the liberty of removing items that I thought were either too specific, a little too crunchy for this committee's purposes, and also things that I just felt that did not apply.
The floor is open for discussion, please. Ms. Yingling.
Just a point of clarification, number 4 in debate. If I'm understanding what that does first, Under Robert's rules, that would just be a call of the question. Or is the plan to, anytime we end debate, to take one vote on ending debate and then another vote on the question itself?
That's correct. And it would be that, my recommendation is that we increase that to 2/3 required to end debate and trigger the underlying vote.
Anyone else, any other comment from the floor? Sir? Oh, okay. All right, seeing no questions on this, I move that we go ahead and adopt the rules governing the Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee as amended. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Dozier. The motion has been moved and properly seconded. At this time, would like to go ahead and receive the vote. Madam Pro Tem? We'll go ahead and do these by, do you have comment?
No, I was
We'll go ahead
just
and do these by roll call if you want to.
Actual roll call.
What is it better, what's the easiest way for you to annotate?
Roll call is fine.
Roger that.
From a secretarial or minutes keeping perspective, is that going to, who is?
Tanya should keep her on that.
Oh, okay, so
Or
roll call.
her,
Is that the easiest?
Oh, that'd be easy.
Okay,
okay.
all right.
Do we have you have a roster for roll call?
I had it, no,
last
not, I had
week's?
it with the last week, but I didn't.
Okay.
I only brought my maps.
No worries, no
so,
worries.
Yeah, if I have that. Thank you. And you'll have to help me with pronunciation. I know, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's probably going to be a couple that are going to trip me. Chair Penn?
Aye.
Martha Pint? Lamont Anderson?
Aye.
Pro Tem? Aye. Elizabeth Stanton? Katie Dater?
Aye.
Katie? Keith. Sorry. And you answered, but anyway. We need a little laughter. Leanne?
Aye.
Vel, would you pronounce your last name again? Freesting. Con Howerton?
Aye.
And Joseph Dozier? And Casey Yingling? I miss Levi Henry.
Aye.
Already, did we? No. Randy Rathbun.
Aye.
Kelly Shodor.
Aye.
And Niquella Pack. Nicaela Pack. I believe that's it, Mr. Chairman. That's on the roster.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Howerton, recognize?
So for the live stream, do we need to use microphones or not?
Yes, I don't believe that this picks up your voice if you don't have the microphone on. Please, and I'm getting nods from staff, please utilize the microphone at all times so that people can pick up. I did review last week's meeting, and if you're not in the mic, it was a little tough, right? Thank you guys for being here today. I'm glad you're feeling better as well. It's good to see you. Okay, that said, we have that vote in and unanimous. The rules are adopted, they are approved, and they are voted upon. So we are good with that vote as well. Thank you. Now, moving further down the agenda, let's talk about our down selection of our redistricting maps. Okay, this is the business that we're here for. I approached the pro tem offline. My intent was having 11 maps. What we wanted to do is see. My understanding is this, and I'll relay what I said to her via email. Okay. The county commission is looking for a bipartisan map, which is our charge to present a map. As we discussed last week, we are also going to take liberty, as we have in our resolution, to
add any other recommendations as we deem necessary. My thought on that is that that could be 2 additional maps, if you feel very strongly about it. It doesn't have to be that as far as the recommendation format is, okay? To get to the A map that we have to send up, I would imagine that they would dismiss out of hand anyone that is particularly partisan, be it from the GOP side or the DNC side. I say GOP and DNC because you've been appointed by the Sedgwick County parties, so we're under no pretense of partisanship. My idea and hope would be that we could come together and identify a couple of these that we all agree aren't going to make the cut, and dismiss those, and streamline down to actually have valid discussion, detailed discussion, on things that we think will work. I would love to have that discussion, or your consideration or your thoughts about that concept in the interest of making this limited time that we have together as efficient as possible. With that, I yield to Madam Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My thoughts, and I totally agree. I agree with how you've couched and or prefaced your priorities. There was a question that I also asked in our exchange by email, and that is, if there is an additional map that comes from the public, I'm thinking of the League of Women's Voters because we talked about that at the last meeting, so I'm just simply using that organization as an example. Is there an opportunity for that map to come forward for us to consider? Any map, any additional map outside of the 11 that we have? Or is that something that the body should discuss?
Or is that a question?
It is a question, yes.
I think that what we discussed last week, I think that it came in with Commissioner Cruz saying that there was supposed to be a submission to the Board of County Commissioners from that organization. It was a personal request that she made. So I think that that is the venue. If she wants to have that inject point, that's her business. As far as my understanding and my feeling is that this body will take up is not necessarily a map from the League of Women Voters or the men voters. It's the data, it's the concepts behind said map so that we can actually argue and discuss that. I would like to have that fleshed out, if that's something that the board feels strongly about, to bring it in for due consideration and push it through the process as we just gone over in our rules. Not generally opposed to considering anything that comes from an outside organization. I just think that this particular body has a charge to examine the myriad maps that we already have that have been coordinated, constructed dispassionately by the staff. We have 11. We have an overabundance as it is. So as to not gum up the works any further, I would not be amenable to considering or taking in another outside organization's map at this time. However, if there's a member that would like to discuss anything that another map has out there, we leave it to the body. If they want to vote on that and have Mr. Joseph draw it up, that's fine too. Mr. Fessinger?
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd add on to that briefly. I think if we're going by the four corners of the agenda, this current item is only really for down selecting maps. If in my opinion, if a map were to be presented today, it would be during item D, discussion of the remaining maps. I think would be the appropriate time to bring forth a map through a motion, but I'll defer to the Chair and Chair Pro Tem's interpretation.
Okay, so based on those comments, I don't have a problem with that. I tend to agree. So, speaking of those guiding principles and/or guide rails. What's important to us as as a committee, and I know what's important to me, and it is those communities of interest. So I'd like to be able to open the floor or just hear your comments on how we move forward with discussing the importance of that being consideration for narrowing and culling the number of maps that we have.
I don't have a guiding set of wants or needs personally. There are some very smart people in this room, and I yield to you as far as what are going to be the things that either limit our consideration of a particular map or not. I would just imagine that if there's a map in that bevy of 11 plus that we already have, or 10 plus I think it is right now, a total of 11, that is automatically going to receive a 8-7 vote or whatever the case might be, one way or another, because it is diametrically opposed to one side of the House or the other. I think that those will be the ones that we can go ahead and get rid of, because we're not going to achieve the parity that we want, bipartisanship on those maps. If there's anything that you feel strongly about along that spectrum, if we have overlap, I think those are the ones that we can go ahead and preemptively right now, in order to get down to business, get rid of. I don't know if you have any thoughts, if you've had any consideration of that. That was why I wrote you the email and tried to give you the call on that. Because I want us to get to the nuts and bolts of what we want to do. Now, if you have, if you've talked with your members, or if you haven't, we can take a recess if you want to, and you can have that conversation. But I am sensitive to people's time, and that's the biggest driver for me. I did see a hand, Mr. Dozier.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I had a question around introduction of maps and downvoting to 5 maps. As long as we follow the rules set forth, I just want to understand that we could ultimately have 5 maps today, but during the interim days, maybe members want to amend one of those maps by a certain number of precincts, or maybe members look at the maps available and want to maybe present one that's a mix of 2 of those maps or something like that. As long as we follow the order set forth, it would be then potentially conducive and also productive. Then would it be allowed at our final meeting, when we make our decision, to put forward a map to the committee if there is agreement for that map to be heard?
So if the question is, Mr. Dozier, if what we agree on today, if it's amendable, if it's changeable, if we can, by a vote of the body, 2/3 in support, make the changes. Is that what you're saying?
I guess you could view, potentially, instead of presenting a new map, a heavily amended version of one of the maps.
Map.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because obviously we'll have a few days, and we may have some look at the maps, and some members may think, oh, maybe we should add this precinct or remove that precinct for X or Y reason.
I'm amendable to that. The only, we are under a time constraint. So there's only today, and actually we should have the decision by today. So we're going to cull it down to the 5, and then we'll make the ultimate either 1 to 3 that we will forward on to the VOCC. So, it's just time that we're working with. Yeah.
And it's crunchy, isn't it? Give me 1 second. I want to recognize both of you. I think I saw Mr. Fessinger's hand.
Because I just wanted to add this to assist the committee in moving through this item. We veered more into a more general discussion of the maps and how we might be doing things in the future, but the agenda item that you're on right now is really just for down selecting maps. My recommendation is that we proceed with motions to remove maps from consideration and debate on those specific motions.
Right, and now let me grab 2 comments here from Mr. Henry. It doesn't matter either. Okay. Ms. Yingling?
Well, one point of order, I see on the agenda, we're going to hear from the cab chairs. If we're going to remove maps, I think that it would be smart to hear from them first before we call a map. Unless there's some other policy reason that we're not going to do that, I would hate to remove a map before we heard from those cab chairs, since they are on the agenda today. And then I think my second point is, if we're not going to hear from a map from outside organizations because we're trying to cull it down, I think that same reasoning follows to remove maps drawn by commissioners versus staff. I think that if we're going to limit who has access to draw maps, 3 easy maps to remove are maps drawn by commissioners versus staff.
I just had a quick point of order. Pro Tem Chair Miller said that it would take 2/3 of a vote to change a map. That's not my understanding of the rules. Can you clarify that, Mr. Chairman?
It would take a majority vote.
Majority. Simple? Yep.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Fessinger, then exactly what actions require the 2/3 vote?
It would take a 2/3 vote to end discussion prematurely and trigger a vote on the motion that is being debated on. Or it takes a 2/3 vote to overrule the a chair's determination on an issue within the chair's purview.
Okay, that's good clarification. Thank you.
And those, in my absence, should it be, those rules are yours as well? Okay.
Understood.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and Ms. Yingling, definitely understand your point. Again, with the reason that it was like this, we had the hopes prior to that part of the agenda of bringing in the cabs that we would already have that down select, and the cabs would then be commenting on whatever's left over because we've already had our agreement. It's not to limit the cabs or anything like that with their input. But again, where we are right now is with the down selection of the redistricting maps. That said, let's start. I'd like to hear some of your comments on, let's figure out which of these maps we can down select out of the 11 that we have on hand. All right, the chair recognizes Ms. Pack.
Thank you. So as I'm looking and thinking of down selecting and thinking of making the least amount of changes, I look at maps 1 and 5, and they do the most amount of changes. 59 precincts in map 1 are changed, and 164 in map 5. If you look at the disenfranchisement rates on those maps, it's the largest as well, percentage-wise. So if we're looking at population equivalency and compactness, and in regards to the other factors as well, I would take a look at maps 1 and 5 to being eliminated.
1, 5, and 2? Or 1 and 5? 1 and 5.
1 and 5.
We have Con Howerton, Casey Yingling, and Kelly.
Thank you so much.
In that order.
I apologize, Chair Pro Tem. Is that a motion from Ms. Pack to downsize 1 and 5?
It was a discussion, but I do move.
And Chair Pro Tem, I apologize. I'm just attempting to apply the rules to this discussion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to down select maps 1 and 5. Has been properly seconded by Mr. Howerton. So moved and seconded. Open for discussion now. I believe we had Mr. Howerton was the first hand.
And then Ms. Yingling,
Ms. Yingling?
and then Schultz.
And then, okay.
And just as a reminder, it is Ms. Pack can initiate debate if she wishes to as well.
Oh, you have the first floor to open debate. I do apologize. Go. Okay. That said, Ms. Yingling, you're on.
I was going to wait for this till later discussion. It was a point that got brought up last time when we weren't here, so I kind of stayed quiet. But I do think it's an important point to bring up with what Nikayla's saying about maps 1 and 5. Point 11 from the slideshow last time from staff about how we configure districts makes an assumption that I think is flawed. It says that if any person is moved, depending on their election year, let's say you move from a presidential year to a governor's year or governor's year to a presidential year. That doesn't necessarily disenfranchise a voter. There's actually an opportunity to enfranchise more voters by putting their precinct in a district that actually the history of their voting shows they vote higher that year versus another year. So I would have to say that I do not agree that voters are disenfranchised in maps 1 or 5. Actually, if you look at the precincts that are moved, many of them are moved from a governor's year to a presidential year. And that means that those voters actually will turn out more and more of their voices would be heard. So I think that that's an important point to make. The other consideration, I think, if we're going to just cut something because it's different, there has been systemic issues with how our districts have been drawn in terms of representation from a lot of different voters. And I think that it's not necessarily in our best interest to cut maps simply because they change the most. Because in my opinion, there are some parts of 1 and some parts of 5 that actually enfranchise more voters, make it easier for them to vote, and 2, fix some systemic issues we've had with how we draw maps in Sedgwick County.
Chair recognizes Mr. Schodorf.
Thank you. I do appreciate, thank you. I do appreciate that argument because voter turnout is always higher in presidential years. So that could be a benefit to that district. When I was looking at this, this is map 1. This goes to some of the public comments that we received, and it keeps 40% of the black vote centralized into one district, essentially giving them a hugely strong voice in that district. Where right now it's currently split between 3 districts, which is diluting the voice. So that's one benefit I see in 1. Where the votes are moving from District 3 to District 4, it actually is going to line up with their state Senate district. I've been spending a lot of time on this. So it actually lines up with their state Senate district, which would generally increase the turnout in their vote in their election year. Let's see. It also unifies Delano, which is a community of interest, in central Wichita. So I think those are all benefits of 1. I have notes on all the maps, but I'll just stick to 1 and 5 here. In 5, this is the most compact map that we have. This is the most equivalent map that we have it's the max population equivalency, essentially. And it also creates diversity in commissioners because we have 2 city cores. We have an south side and southeast Wichita, outside kind of a little further out, which is a lot of aircraft community. So they have common interests in their commissioner. We have a rural commissioner, which would represent some of these similar interests that rural Kansas has. And so I think this map provides max compactness, max population equivalency, and creates diversity in commissioners, which I think could be potentially important. So those are my reasons why I actually found these maps to be beneficial.
Mr. Dater, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the disenfranchised number, I know that's something that came up. So 57,000 in number 5. I know we're talking about other elections too, those are important, but these districts are specific for Sedgwick County elections, so we're dealing with those districts. And that means 57,000 in number 5, that's 11% of the population is going to be disenfranchised. That's a pretty large chunk of the population for the entire county. So the next closest one is number 1, which is 27,000. Let me get back to that one. 29,000, sorry, which is 5.5% of the population. The rest of them, all disenfranchised less than 10,000. So there's a huge gap with these two. So I definitely see those two pop out as maps that they raise concern, definitely. Less than 10,000 in all the other maps. Thank you.
Ms. Schodorf, please.
Thank you. So comparing and contrasting the issues that we're looking at, when we're looking at moving elections, which we can say disenfranchising or reenfranchising, either way, that's one consideration. When we're looking at the other maps and determining which ones to take out, there are important differences to compare between the remaining maps, which are that they do split community of interest, such as there's one map that splits Riverside right in half. I think that from what I have heard from community members, they're furious about that. There are maps that split Indian Hills, Benjamin Hills, and Riverside. That's the north end. And the north end has a lot of support in those neighborhoods, same school districts. And so I've heard a lot, I'm from that area, so I've heard a lot from those residents that they don't want to be split up. When we're looking at some of the others, so those are just some community of interest issues that we need to take into consideration that a lot of the other maps having.
Very well, I understand that, but right now our motion on the floor is for maps 1 and 5 by Ms. Pack, not the other maps at this time.
But it is important when you're deciding whether to take one map out, what maps you're left with.
Ms. Pack?
Yeah, I want to comment to Yingling and Shordorf on some of your comments. So when I'm looking at map 5, and it has some of the highest minorities in poverty. And so this map is going to be then moving from District 4 to District 1, which District 1 includes some of the highest income neighborhoods. So when I'm thinking of those factors, that's going to dilute. So if you have any comments.
Any comments complete?
To add on that.
Okay. Chair recognizes Mr. Dater.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I guess right now we have 11 maps and we're trying to get down as quickly as we can for sake of time. And so hopefully there's other maps that can address those needs. So right now I think we have 2 maps ahead of us that hopefully we can move this along.
Very well, Madam Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to consider, for the committee to consider discussing all the maps at one time versus taking 1 or 2 maps at a time. Because, as you've stated, Ms. Schodorf, that they impact the other. They impact the total, the outcome. Yes.
Is that a hand?
Ms. Pack.
Ms. Pack?
Recording in progress.
And I'm amenable to that. And I would be willing to, withdraw the motion for more discussion before eliminating.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Chair.
All right. So we have a withdrawal. Let us take a vote on withdrawing said motion.
I apologize, Mr. Chair, that's just your decision, sir.
Oh, it's my decision. Oh, fantastic. That's great. I want to vote on 1 and 5 on the motion that's on the floor. I want to vote on it. I want to vote on it, and I have some comments about some of the things that you brought up, Ms. Schodorf. The map that you say, number 5, or did you say number 1 has 40% of the black vote in it?
Yeah, I'm actually citing from documentation that you gave us.
Okay. There's no such thing as the black vote.
Excuse me.
All right? Blacks are not a monolith. That's problematic. That's problematic. Please don't do that.
Please don't do that.
Number 2, if you were to put a district that has all of the black persons in Wichita, that does shut out their voice and their representation. That means that all of the white people have 4 county commissioners, and a one district only, with the black folks, they only have one. How is that equitable?
I can respond if you'd like, because I actually
Well,
already did say.
I'm still commenting.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we're going to do this in a way that brings these communities together, we can't, from this committee, do a government-sanctioned segregation. I find that highly offensive, and I want to take the vote on 1 and 5. You may comment.
First of all, I find your comments to be highly inappropriate and accusing the staff who made these maps of government-sanctioned segregation.
I didn't accuse the staff of anything, madam.
They made
I
the
said your
map.
comments.
And my first comment was that putting a certain population split into two districts gives them strong votes, strong voice in 2 districts. Diluting them between 4 districts dilutes their vote and their voice to their commissioners. So you are misrepresenting my comments, and I do not appreciate it. I find that to be so highly inappropriate of the chair.
So there was a meeting that just happened out in District 3. District 3 as it currently is drawn, splits maize, is that correct? And there was a comment made from the constituents out there that they were extremely pleased that they had overrepresentation on the county commission because they have 2 commissioners representing them, and that was something that was seen as a positive. I didn't say anything about the staff. What I'm talking about is if you're going to say that a community on basis of color should only have 1 county commissioner representing
I
them.
did not say that.
Okay, well, thank you.
So
Thank you
please
for
quit
clarifying the
misrepresenting my
understanding.
statements.
I didn't say that you did. I'm asking the question, madam.
That was a question.
You're out of order.
Mr. Chair.
Is there another comment? Feel free to say.
Have you denied the motion to withdraw?
I have denied the motion to withdraw. Let's vote.
Sir, I call the question.
Question's been called. We will vote on the motion on the floor of the down selection of
We have to vote on the
maps.
call,
Yes.
ending discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like for Mr. Fessinger to actually clarify what we're voting on, because I don't,
At this point, there's no longer debate or amendment. This committee needs to take up the issue of whether to end debate and vote on the motion. Ending debate and voting on the motion would require a 2/3 vote of this committee to do that.
So he's called the question to end the debate.
That's true.
We will
Yep.
now take up a vote on whether or not to end the debate.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Let's do it. Okay, let's vote on the motion to end the debate given by Mr. Freesting.
oh, let me, thank you. Chair Penn?
Aye.
Martha Pine? Lamont Anderson?
Aye.
Pro Tem? Aye. Elizabeth Stanton?
Aye.
And Keith Dater?
Aye.
Leanne Moore?
Aye.
Val
Freesting.
Freesting?
Like bee sting. That's all I had to remember.
Freesting?
Yes. Aye.
Cal Howerton?
Aye.
Joseph Dozier?
Aye.
Levi Henry?
No.
Casey Yingling?
No.
Brandy Rathman?
No.
Kelly Shodor?
No.
Nikayla Pack?
Which vote?
I did.
And what is the count?
Oh. It's 10-5 to
By a
end.
vote of 10 to 5, the motion carries. Okay. So we have ended that debate, and now we are back on your original motion, Ms. Pack, to down select maps 1 and 5. Does that agree?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, please.
Point of order. Are we, since that motion was in, are we now voting on removing 1 and 5?
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, we've had the motion by Ms. Pack to down select 1 and 5. We've had discussion on it. At this time, we'd like to take our vote on down selecting in 1 and 5 for dismissal as we move down to our bottom 5. Let's go ahead and take our vote.
Chair Penn?
Aye.
Martha Pine. Lamont Anderson.
Aye.
Pro Tem, aye. Elizabeth.
Aye.
And Keith Dater.
Aye.
Leanne Moore.
Aye.
Vel Freesting.
Aye.
I'm going to give you a high five.
Con Howerton.
Aye.
Joseph Dozier.
Aye.
Levi Henry.
No.
Casey Yingling.
No.
Randy Rathbun.
No.
Kelly Shodor.
No.
And Nikayla Pack.
Aye.
So it should be 11-4.
With a vote of 11-4, the motion carries. 1 and 5 have been down selected and out. Let's move to the next section of maps. Is there a motion for discussion? Ms. Yingling?
I make a motion to remove maps 9, 10, and 11 because they're drawn by commissioners. And I think that we need to stick with staff maps.
Second.
A motion has been made to remove maps 9, 10, and 11 as they were drawn by
Commissioners.
And not staff. It has been properly seconded. I believe that was Mr. Henry. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let the record reflect that. It's now open for discussion.
I'll start since it's my motion. Unfortunately, I believe that Plan 1 was probably one of our most bipartisan maps. And so now I think it's very important that we have some options in front of us that represent bipartisan ideals. And I think that the easiest way for us to cut 3 more maps is to remove maps drawn by commissioners, that there's just no way around it. You're drawing it for yourself. No offense to the commissioners. It's just, there's a reason we have this committee is because we need some people at 30,000 feet. And I think that it's only appropriate if we're going to remove maps and not accept any more maps from outside groups that we don't accept maps drawn by commissioners.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam.
I totally agree. I also actually would like to amend your motion. As I had started to speak to before we went through the machinations of denying the opportunity to make the change and to go ahead with the vote, what I would like to do is actually list 5, well, we already have 2 that we've taken off, but there's an additional, you said 7, 8, and, 9 and 10? 9, 10, and 11. So I have 9, 10, and 11, but I also, if we're 9, 10, 11,
1 and 5.
and 1 and 5, that's 5 maps right there. But there are 2 additional maps that I would like for us to consider to vote on, to remove, and that's 7 and 8.
An amendment is on the floor to also, to amend Ms. Yingley's motion, to also remove 7
and 8. So it would be 7, 8.
Does she have a second? Motion, the amendment has been seconded by Ms. Shodor. And now, let's have some discussion on that amendment before we take a vote on that amendment. Anybody have any comment on 7 and 8? Mr. Chair recognizes Mr. Howerton, please.
So the discussion right now, is it on the amendment of 7 and 8? Or is it on all 5?
Right now, we're talking about the amendment as
Okay.
it was just offered for to add 7 and 8 into the down select.
Thank you.
Could that be a friendly amendment?
Yes, my only concern is the arguments for removing 7 and 8 are different, and so I would like to speak to the reasons that I'd want to remove 7 and 8, but if the body is willing to remove all of them in one vote, let's get out of here.
Mr. Dater.
I think it would be nice to just go through there, but like you said, there's different reasons for each of the maps, so I kind of like to break them up and maybe talk about them individually.
Okay. Ms. Pine.
That was my original.
This is my motion, I'm going to accept it as friendly amendment, so let's just...
Ms. Pine?
I would just like to hear the thoughts behind adding 7 and 8, what the reasoning is. Ms. Yingling shared her ideas about 9, 10, and 11. So
Absolutely.
if
For
we
me,
could talk about 7 and 8.
it's communities of interest, it's separating communities of interest. I think it's very, very, very obvious. And I'm definitely supportive of maintaining that cohesiveness of a community.
Ms. Shortall?
I also think 7 and 8 dilute the city center voice around 235, kind of in the central core of the city, because it's going to be diluted by the interests of Cheney, Garden Plain, Andale. I mean, they don't have a lot in common. And so to reach into the city core, pull out and dilute their vote, it doesn't seem very fair. Where am I at? These also will split the north end, moves Riverside and Indian Hills in one, splits Benjamin Hills.
And you're referring to 7 or 8?
7 and 8.
7 and 8.
They're very similar. And so those are two communities of interest that I think are highly affected in these maps. And it also splits Viola and Clearwater, and those are very similar communities. They have the same church. They are very unified. And so that splits them in half also. So those are just some of the things that I've identified in 7 and 8 that I think should be taken into consideration.
And thank you for the comments, Madam Shordorf. Do we have any other discussion on the amendment? Mr. Friesting?
Not sure about just the amendment, but just the general principle of asking whether it's legal or otherwise about, we seem to be defining communities of interest as only with one definition of types of people. I would think that communities of interest also would be just geographical communities or interested. So cutting maize in half is a community of interest. It's just one geographical community. So is there a legal definition of community of interest?
Mr. Fessinger?
There is not. It's a subjective factor. It's this committee's role to think through those issues and in my view, define for itself what communities of interest that are important to each individual committee member. So if that is a consideration of yours, sir, then that can affect your decision one way or another.
Just as a blanket statement, I oppose defining communities of interest as types of people.
Any comment? Any comment?
Let me. So and that's Mr. Friesting. I hear what you're saying. However, when you're looking at communities of interest from a different perspective, and we all do have our own perspectives, communities of interest can be somewhat flexible. However, it typically is going to involve people, and it's going to be their focus, their interest, what it is that they center their community life around. So communities of interest are hugely important in terms of looking at the outcome of our elections and ensuring that those elections outcomes reflect and represent what our communities look like. So I duly noted that you disagree with that. However, there is a basis for considering communities of interest, and it's based on people. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. I'm going to go to Ms., who was first?
I believe Ms. Yingling.
Okay, Ms. Yingling and then Ms. Pint.
I just want to address one other community of interest that's separated in 7 and 8. There are some tri-county neighborhood associations, things like that operate in that area of town, and both 7 and 8 actually split up tri-county neighborhood associations in that area. So that's just another factor to consider when we're thinking about communities. Indian Hills and them are all in one. They have a parade and all sorts of stuff they do together.
I would just like to put this out there that the reality is it's not up to us to define a community of interest. That's up to the people that live in those communities. And that's something that this, unfortunately, has not allowed enough time to be taken into consideration, and those meetings and hearings to be held by those individual communities to determine what their own community of interest is, and then their input brought into this process. So maybe I would just like to say, I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration in the future going forward.
And thank you, Madam Pike. Mr. Arthur.
I would be interested in hearing from the proponent.
There we go. A proponent of map 7 and 8 as to why they think that's a good map, that would be helpful in my consideration.
Are there proponents of maps 7 and 8 that would like to speak to Mr. Rathbun's question? While we are on discussion right now of the friendly amendment to add 7 and 8 for down selection to Ms. Yingling's original motion of maps 9, 10, and 11. I see no, okay, hold on. I think I do have a proponent. Mr. Friesing.
No, sir, different.
Okay. 1 second. Mr. Howerton, proponent of it?
I wouldn't necessarily be a proponent of it. It equalizes the numbers pretty good. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We do need to consider communities of interest. We need to do our best. And no offense to anyone involved, but, you know, this really is the county commissioner's job, and they put it on us with very little time and very little resources, and so we just need to do the best we can. I don't know if I'm a proponent of map number 7, but I'm looking at the numbers, and it's pretty well equalized. That's all. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dozier.
There are other maps with better population equivalency, and we can, if we need to amend later, we can, but I think if that's the reasoning, there are better maps for that.
Mr. Friesing.
Point of clarification, is our next vote going to be on all 5?
Your next vote is going to be on that amendment to Ms. Yingling's original
7
motion.
and 8.
7 and 8 addition into the consideration for Ms. Yingling's motion. Mr. Rathbun, have you had your question answered? Okay, that said, I'll call the question. Say it again, sir? You haven't had it answered.
No, but that's all right.
That's all right. Well, I think that, sir, I'm looking at it, and you all can tell me if my analysis is off. I think I tend to agree with Mr. Dozier. The staff generated these maps. They fit within the 4 corners of what the legal challenge will be. And what the legal challenge is talking about our compactness of the lines and talking about our population density with the variance therein. I think that these maps do a fine job of that. There has been a lot of consideration right now for communities of interest, which is another consideration. And my understanding, as we heard last week and again this week, that whatever it is that the Board of County Commissioners approves needs to meet legal muster, right? So whatever we submit to them for our recommendation, we want to make sure that it meets the legal qualifications. And right now, the things that are incumbent on us are the compactness and the population. Things that we can consider nice to have, not necessarily need to have, will be communities of interest, and however we choose to define that, because that doesn't have a firm, fixed definition. Communities of interest can be on, like Ms. Yingling has said, on basis of HOAs or different associations that you might have, socioeconomic background, racial background. There are a lot of different things that can go into that consideration, geographical boundaries as well. I will allow any comment from Mr. Joseph at this time, if you care to make any comment about 7, 8, and how you all came up with that.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree that the definition of a community and community of interest is difficult to define. It takes in many, many different factors. It takes in many data sets and data points that I don't have, that maybe a member has and another member does not have. So, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to define, and I agree that the people that live in that community would be the ones to define that community. Even the geographic boundary of the community is difficult. There's no hard, fast line where a neighborhood ends, where it begins. So that would be my comment.
Mrs. Pack?
I believe it's Kansas City. They have a process where communities can draw their areas that they consider their community and present that. And I think that would really be something of value when discussing this.
Duly noted. At this time, is there any further discussion on the amendment of addition of 7 and 8 to the original motion of maps 9, 10, and 11? Ms. Shodor.
Thank you. I would just like to note that I think there's validity, and I feel like maybe my comments have been mischaracterized. There is validity in Ms. Miller's statement that it is around people, and that Mays is a community geographically, and those are both communities of interest. And we kind of just have to weigh, as best as we can, all of those considerations that make a community, as best as we can. And so everybody is right, and we just have to do our best. Thanks.
Thank you for the sentiment. Okay. Call the question for this amendment here. Do we have a second? Seconded by Mr. Howerton. And now let's take a vote on the amendment, please.
Chair Finn.
Aye.
Martha Pine. Aye. Lamont Anderson.
No.
Pro Tem. Aye. Elizabeth Sanson. Aye. Keith Dater.
Aye.
Leanne Moore.
Aye.
Con Howerton.
Aye.
Didn't forget you, Bill. Priesting.
Aye.
Savoy. Joseph Dozier.
Aye.
And Levi Henry.
Aye.
Casey Yingling.
Aye.
Randy Rathman.
Aye.
Kelly Shodor.
Aye.
And Michaela Pack.
Aye.
I think that's
12 to 1? 14 to 1.
with a vote of 14 to 1. The ayes have it. The amendment is approved onto the original motion. Back on the question. Mr. Fett,
Excuse me, Chair, yeah, you're correct. At this point, debate can resume on the newly amended motion, although we've really sort of blended debate on whether to amend the motion with the merits of the amended motion. It was kind of all blended together.
Exactly.
If the committee wishes to continue debating the amended amendment, it can, or if it's ready to vote, it can do that too.
Tracking. Mr. Friesting?
Chairman, I would like to speak in favor of Plan 11 because it is under the definition of compactness and geography. It really equalizes the square miles of the district so that everybody, and I believe it also equalizes some more of economic and income and family status.
Hearing that discussion, any further discussion concerning any of the maps up for consideration of down select? Ms. Yingling?
Since it's my motion, I'd just like to speak to map 11 and the considerations just brought forward. While that may be the case, we have removed the most compact map already, and we've moved the most egalitarian map already in this committee. And so I don't know that we can consider these maps without considering bigger issues like voice dilution. South Wichita has far less in common with Goddard and Clearwater than they do in all of these other maps where District 3 is a mega powerhouse district for our rural communities, and their commissioner can act as such. I think Plan 11, it mixes up just a ton of communities and really doesn't consider what kind of folks live in those communities. Goddard is very different from Hayesville, is very different than Delano, and I think to shove all of those into District 2, it makes it very hard for that commissioner to represent anybody very well. So while we might be looking at compactness or that they might be close together, when you look at this map as well, geographically it's huge. And when we talk about 5 commissioners and the money it takes to run these races, map 11 is going to make these races for county commission so much more expensive than they need to be and what they are right now. And I think that there's some issues with monies in politics that folks would also consider. So that's all the stuff wrong with Plan 11.
Ms. Schodorf.
Thank you. I think Plan 11 is kind of wild, where we have the homeless population in downtown Wichita, like Broadway and Murdoch area, in the same district or with the same commissioner as Commissioner Bentley. We are again moving the city center west, all the way out to the same district as Mount Hope and Cheney. This moves a lot of election days, and I know that was a big consideration for us earlier. And it dilutes the city center vote, which have unique struggles and unique needs, and it dilutes it by bringing in rural communities in each one of these districts, especially 2, 3, 4, to dilute the vote of people who live in the urban core. So that, and if someone wants to be a proponent to this, I think we should look at the election days that are moved, because I think, I'm trying to pull up the stat right here in the spreadsheet, but my note here from my previous research on this map is that it's significant. I think it's the highest number of disenfranchised voters as
Does it, when you say that, Madam, are you saying that they move to, explain that the vote?
under the definition of disenfranchised voters that we've been using, it does move election days in the opposite direction more than any other map here.
Mr. Dater?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that right now we're discussing the bundle of, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11?
Check.
As a whole? So
That's
we
correct.
don't know that we needed to necessarily discuss every individual map. I would be good with, getting comments out is good, but I'm looking at time and
Can we call the question?
seeing the, well, so, yeah, that's it.
Are your comments complete, Mr. Dater? Okay. Madam Pro Tem.
Oh, no. I heard a call the question. We also have Con Howerton, who's...
I have a question. If we vote yay on this, then we're down to 4 maps, and I go see my grandkids, right? I'm just asking, is that correct? I know we got to do the cab and all that stuff, but that puts us down to 4 maps. So we did better today than we even hoped. Is that correct? Well,
You are correct.
I'll call the question then.
So prior to calling the question, is there an opportunity? Do I still?
Hold on a second, please. Ms. Miller.
Yes. So just a couple of, I am backtracking, so I have no problem with being, redirected. But when I look at, and I know that the maps that have been removed have been considered and referred to as the most compact as well as the most egalitarian, I would question the definition of egalitarianism, as well as compactness, when you look at the center, when you did this, you look at the core, urban core, which is what map 5 does, it consolidates that into that urban core, and then you look at, from an infrastructure perspective, from a business perspective, when you look at what's there to drive the economy in those areas, when you look at the power that that particular commissioner would have in conjunction with the other 4, I think those are also considerations that should come into play when looking at the compactness of it, as well as what it would actually yield for the common interest of the persons that would live within that urban core. And then when looking at 5, and that is 5. So when you go back to 1, once again, when both of them do disenfranchise, I think we've kind of gone back and forth on whether or not if they do. But when looking at Plan 1, I'm also looking at, once again, the economic power or the economic drive and ability to produce within those communities, within that district. And I just look at moving WSU out into District 1, which is already fairly healthy, and then looking at moving Mays out of District 4. So those are just my thoughts when I looked at District 1 and District 5. And then there were a couple of individuals that were within the online public hearing that made those basic comments. So, call the question.
I think that is important. Mr. Fessinger, please.
Right, I think at this
Unless
point,
there's
there's been
comment.
a motion by Mr. Henry to end debate and take a vote. We just need to see whether there's a second to that motion by Mr. Henry.
Second. Oh, sorry. Deaf.
Motion seconded by Mr. Keith Dater. Okay, motion has been made. Do you care to restate your motion?
The amended motion on the floor is to remove proposed plans 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11.
Motion has been moved and is properly seconded. At this time, let's take our vote.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. At this point, I think we're voting on, we need a 2/3 majority on whether we want to end debate.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'll withdraw it. Can I withdraw it? I'll withdraw it.
Just let you end the debate so we don't have to do that.
So withdrawn. Thank you, sir. Now, back on the amended motion, calling for the vote.
Chair Penn.
This one's difficult because there are some maps that I like in there. Aye.
Martha Pine. Aye. Lamont Anderson.
No.
Pro Tem. Aye. Elizabeth. Aye. Keith Dater.
Aye.
Leanne Moore.
Aye.
Bell.
No.
Con Howerton.
Aye.
Joseph Dozier.
No.
Levi Henry.
Aye.
Casey Yingling.
Aye.
Randy Rathbun.
Aye.
Kelly Shodo.
Aye.
And Nikayla Pack.
Aye.
Twelve to 3.
12 to 3, okay. With a vote of 12 to 3, the motion carries. We have now down selected the additionals, and we now have maps 1, 5, 8, 9, 10, 7, and 11 down selected. Maps remaining are 6, 3, 4, and 2. Maps remaining are 6, 3, 4, and 2. Okay, where's that? I want to thank the committee members for that hard work. Thank you so very much for all of the consideration and conversation that we've had on it. At this time, according to our agenda, we want to get into a discussion. We have some Citizen Advisory Board chairs that are present, and I want to thank them each for being here, or their designees, I should say. For District 1 Chair, Levi Craig. Mr. Craig, thank you. Did we have one for District 2 or District 3? Okay. For District 4, we have Nalini Frazier. Did I say that correctly? Ms. Frazier, thank you so much for attending today. And for District 5, Mr. Fred Panari. Yes. Thank you, sir, for coming today. We appreciate it. Going in order from District 1, 4, and 5, if you could approach the table, grab a mic, and if you want to lend any conversation or comments to today's discussion, or any of your thoughts on the remaining maps for our consideration, we'd appreciate it. I would like to give each of you about 3 minutes or so.
Sure. It won't take me too long. A lot of what you guys were discussing and debating, I just kept crossing off notes as you went through it. So I think we settled a lot of it. Both of these meetings have occurred in the interim of our CAB meetings, and we're one of the newly established CABs. So a lot of the conversations we have had have been just one-on-ones and individually speaking. But what I'd just like to highlight for you real quick, just a few items that came up numerous times in our conversations amongst our board and other people we've spoken with. First, we started by prioritizing what we thought would be important to our district and District 1. A couple things that came up. One of the doctors that sit on our board, Dr. Kuhlman, brought up not so much that she liked Map 1, but one aspect of it that she did like is that it split 2 hospital systems into 2 different districts. So she thought that would present an opportunity for better representation and conversation amongst the commissioners. Second thing that came up on each of our meetings, an agenda item, has been the Jaberi master plan. And with that, a lot of conversations have occurred in regards to Bel Air and any regulation that they might have to adapt to with the aviation side of things. So we didn't see any maps where Bel Air came out of that, but we thought that would be important to consider, that if a map came up where Bel Air was eliminated from that, that would be of concern to us. A few general findings, like I said, you guys kind of went through the rest of what we were looking at. But we were concerned with Map 5 is one that we heard quite a bit of feedback on that was not popular. So I guess kudos to you there. Map 3, a lot of what people liked about it was the minimal change. But at the same time, we constantly heard that splitting Riverside and Indian Hills, things like that, were important. So again, reaffirming some of the conversation today. And lastly, something that came up as a more of a model maybe to follow, and our idea that you guys could consider going forward is in Map 2, there's a common area of interest with the Mead neighborhood that is currently split. And there's an opportunity to realign it like in Map 2, but the interesting aspect of it is it just shifts between Districts 1 and 5. So both election cycles for the county level fell in 2022, so we feel like there could be opportunities with some of the common area of interest and on the borders of some of these districts to where there could be some shifting and not really any effect on disenfranchised voters or moving of precincts and whatnot. So that's really, like I said, marked out a lot of the notes, but that was a key little tidbits from our conversation. So thank you, guys.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Craig. I appreciate that. Madam Pro Tem, did you have any comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have Ms. Frazier.
So my comments, which may be slightly obsolete at this point, but we haven't heard from everyone in our 12-person CAB yet, but there are 3 members of our board who have voiced support for Map 3 and 2 members who have voiced support for Map 9, which is out. We have not had a vote or really had enough of a robust discussion as a CAB. I, for one, have more questions than answers, but questions from our board are, why is this being rushed? Why was this deadline established? And how was that date set? Continuity, and so just, those are just questions to pose. I know we're kind of past that now, but in terms of continuity of representation, this has been brought up. So considering some people are going to have a different commissioner that they didn't vote for a period of time, we want that to be a consideration. There are strong concerns about redistricting in a way that disenfranchises certain voters. And so, we've defined that as where those people may have had 6 years between their voting for their commissioner. And I totally recognize that there are different ways that we can disenfranchise voters. So this is a multifaceted consideration, which you are well aware. There are concerns from our board that echo what you were discussing earlier, keeping communities of interest together. Other concerns include race and socioeconomic factors. We want to be sure that people with those interests are represented and not split up or have their votes diluted. One very interesting question was raised by one of our board members. Is it better for an interest group, whether that interest is, we consider that to be race or income or geography or interest area or et cetera? Is it better for that interest group to be in one district so as to increase their voice? Or do we need to be concerned about spreading those folks around and diluting their voice? Or does that actually give representation in all of the districts? And I don't know the answer to that, but it was a consideration that was brought up, and I just wanted to bring that forward as you continue to discuss. I appreciate the work that you are all doing. This is extremely difficult to sort through, so thank you for your work.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Frazier. We appreciate that. I think that some of those questions that your members have asked, those were pressed upon us as far as the dates and everything. We could definitely get with legal and get you some feedback on that. But thank you for the charity in your comments. This is hard work, and these people have stepped up to the plate admirably. So we really do appreciate all of the comment that we're having in here. Madam Pro Tem.
No comment.
Very well. And forgive me if I handle your name wrong, Mr. Fred. Pannier?
Pannier.
Boom.
Yes.
Welcome to committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for your time spent. My apologies, I left my house before 7 this morning. I didn't bring my notes. I haven't been home since, but most of my comments would have been relegated to the maps that have been voted out. So my comments at this time would be, one, lots of concern about communities of interest. And, I understand there is a concept of that, but let's just think of it this way. We're all citizens of Sedgwick County, and that's by definition a community of interest. But if you look at the voter registration, you got Democrats, you've got Republicans, you've got independents. If you want to look at the demographics, you've got blacks, you've got whites, you've got Hispanic, and several other Asians, etc. So what part of that Sedgwick County citizenship defines the community of interest for Sedgwick County? There's only one thing that makes us a community of interest, and that's our residence, where we live, okay? Because when we go to the polls, you have different people getting elected for different reasons based on different ideas that the voters want and what those who choose to serve are. So I live in Cedar Lakes Estates, and I have probably the biggest cross-section of demographics that I can think of as there are anywhere. We've got homeless people in our community. We've got blacks, we've got Asians, we've got Hispanics, we've got retired people, we've got blue-collar people, we have business people. So what is the community of interest? It's just a group of people. And there's no single concept or ideology that you can possibly assign to them in any way, shape, or form. So I think we're overthinking this whole process by being concerned about communities of interest and this and that and disenfranchisement. The very fact that this has to be done, somebody's not going to come out on the short side this time, but the next time they're going to be on the long side. And the last but not least, time is of the essence, and the more time spent talking about it, I mean, again, you're overthinking the whole thing. I think the only thing that makes a difference is the least number of people affected. You take the 2, 3, 4, the 5 or 6 precincts, shift the boundary. The fewest number of people have to change, and that should take care of it. And that's my personal opinion, and I thank you for your time.
Mr. Bernard, thank you so very much for your comments, and thank you so much for staying up all day and bearing with us to this portion for all of our cab chairs. Thank you for what you do in the communities as well. I think that it is well spoken of you, the considerations that you make for your particular communities. Those comments are definitely taken to heart. I know that everyone feels passionately about the maps that have either been down selected or still remain. I know that there's a lot of passion that people are bringing from their own perspectives, but also from their communities. So we're definitely respectful of that. We really appreciate anyone that would step into this fray to advocate vociferously. That said, we're going to move forward in this agenda on the new business to the discussion of redistricting maps. As I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, we still have up for consideration of our down select. We've done a little better than we anticipated. We are at maps, we were supposed to have 5 remaining, we only have 4. We're at maps 6, 3, 4, and 2. Maps 6, 3, 4, and 2 for consideration. As we go out into this next week before we come in for our meeting time next week, this will be the piece that we need to analyze and come back in and see if we can down select to what our top 1 map is going to be, and any other recommendations that we want to make. As we stated before, that could be as many as 2 for further recommendation. At this time, I'd like to go around the horn and see if anyone has any discussion on the redistricting maps, starting with Madam Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and no additional comments. Look forward to actually making the selection.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Anderson?
None at this time, thank you.
Ms. Stanton?
None at this time.
Mr. Rathman?
Pass.
Mr. Dozier?
Pass.
Mr. Dater?
Thank you all for hanging out tonight.
Ms. Moore? Mr. Freesting?
Mr. Chairman, I want to go on record to say that I disagree with redefining the word disenfranchisement. Nobody has been denied the right to vote, which is the proper definition. In any redistricting required, there has to be some voters that get delayed and some voters that are advanced.
Thank you for the comment, Mr. Freesting. Make sure that we have that reflected in the notes for the minutes. I appreciate that. Ms. Pack?
So if we've got 4 maps now, would this be an opportunity to look at a map and create a variation for a 5th?
If that's the will of the body, it'll be up for a vote, but yes. Were you moving to create a new map?
I guess I was just wanting to perhaps have a discussion if that would be, since we wanted to have 5 to move forward with, if there was a map with variation, or if Mr. Joseph, we had an opportunity to create another one to get our 5.
I think our trend is, what we want to do is get down to 3, not necessarily add more to it, but if it's the will of the committee. Mr. Dater, I saw a hand.
Yeah, I would just say, I think 5 was just a generalization, right? We don't have to stick to 5, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I'm fine with 4 as is. I'm fine with our work tonight.
Very well. And, yes, Ms. Shodorf.
Aren't we trying to get down to 1 map?
We are trying to get down to our 1 map. Our resolution states that this board will present a map.
Thank you.
Ms. Pack, you're good?
Yeah, it was just a suggestion if, maps from other organizations we have had talked about, if that could be. But yes, 1 map.
Okay. Ms. Pine?
The only thing that I would suggest is that perhaps between now and the next time we meet, that the county does everything it can to publicize the possibility of public comment, this is disheartening to see this few comments come from the public on this topic. And if you'll notice, the majority of those are all on one day. And there's a single one then a considerable period later. So whatever this county could do to publicize that public comment is welcome and encouraged. I would like to see that.
Yes, ma'am.
I hope we have sheets of these public comments to review on our next meeting.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the comment. Mr. Howerton?
I think I appreciate we've all gathered to try to help our community in a magnificent way. I think the number of comments kind of reflects the engagement of the community. I think it's ironic, at least 50% of our community has no idea who their county commissioner is. And so what we're trying to do is shore them up for the future. And it'd be great if we had more insight and even to know where they're from and whatever. So I appreciate them. I think that was Ms. Yingling that brought that up earlier. But I appreciate the work that we're doing regardless, and everyone's input. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Mr. Henry, please.
I agree with Ms. Pint. I think that we do need more comment from the community, and I do think that we need to do more to share that link. I don't think that it's exclusively on the county. I would challenge each of you to share that in your circles, on your social media, because that's really, I think, the important piece is the people in your social circle may have a higher understanding, may have more interest in these maps. So I would challenge each of you to do that. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Ms. Yingling.
I just want to make a comment on Michaela's point. I think that maybe presenting a whole separate map is a lot, but our rules do allow for amendments to this map. So if, let's say, specific precincts that, split a community, but maybe just moving two of those precincts in a map, those sorts of amendments will be acceptable next week, correct?
Say so.
Yeah, that's correct, and I'll let Mr. Joseph elaborate on this if he needs to, but my understanding is we have the capability in this room to shift precincts around on the existing maps and watch as the population updates and stuff like that so that you can ensure equivalency through your changes. I'll caution the committee, though, that it's pretty easy to set off a cascade of changes on these. But yes, you're correct.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that, and I think that's why it might be easier for folks to kind of see what those do versus having us all come in and draw our own map. And I will say, for anybody watching, I've heard from a lot of you. I'm very disappointed that I heard from you in Messenger and email, and you didn't fill out the survey, because it's hard for me to share what you told me at this meeting. And I think we've seen that with some of these maps that people had very, very strong opinions on Facebook or in email, and they didn't get to everybody because you didn't fill out the survey. And so it's disappointing that I feel like I can't represent what you asked me to do today because of that. So please, please, please take the time to fill out the survey. I think it does make a difference. And for all of us, if you could, fill out who your county commissioner is, that's helpful so we know what neighborhood you live in. Or if you don't want to do that, maybe refer to what neighborhood you live in. So it just gives us some idea for this perspective you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ms. Shodor? Pass? Okay. That said, I want to thank each of the committee members here today for coming in and spending so much time with us to get this thing down selected. It's been a tremendous time with you. Let me end by saying how impressed I am. This has been an interesting discussion and debate here today, but I do want to extend my high praise to Ms. Kelly Shordorf because she has taken such a passionate interest in the detailed analysis of this map session, because it has added to this discussion and getting us into a position that we can actually make some well-reasoned decisions based off of data. So I want to thank you for advocating your position so well and doing the research behind it. It's been well noted. One of the other things that I would like us to do when we get out of here is take a look at those other maps that we have remaining and be ready when we come in here to, again, have that type of detailed discussion. And if, as Ms. Yingling was making mention of earlier, you receive information from your communities, bring it in here. Bring all the voices into the discussion. Excuse me, because what we want to do is make sure that we're being responsive to the people. As Mr. Howerton said, we are sitting here trying to figure out for the next 10 years to make a recommendation, non-binding, of course, but it does have some ramifications for the Wichita citizens. We want to, again, thank each of our cab chairs that have come here today. Thank all of the staff for supporting us in this endeavor here today. And for each one of your families over this holiday season, thank you for allowing your family members to be here working for the people. That said, I'll open up for any other comments or questions before we gavel out. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.